All right, this is part two of chapter 13, and we're picking it up here with the iron triangle of power. Now, remember, this iron triangle was first actually pointed out by an incredibly liberal, communist-leaning fellow named Dwight David Eisenhower, who actually came up with some of the terms that we use, including like military industrial complex and things like that. When he left office, he warned the public about the growing strength of this defense contract military industrial complex and this iron triangle, this circuit of influence. So it works out that you have the Defense Department, the defense contractors, like General Dynamics and Boeing and General Electrics, and then you have Congress. And it sort of works this way. I'm a defense contractor, and I've got a submarine, and I want to have it built, and I go to the Navy, and I go, oh, I got this great submarine, and the Navy's like, we don't need any more submarines. What are you talking about? And then they say, oh, well, if you were retiring, you could become one of our contractor, consultant guys. And then suddenly the admiral that they're talking to absolutely decides he needs a submarine. And then they go to Congress and they said, Congress, we need this submarine. And they're like, oh my God, I can't afford a submarine. What are you talking about? There's not even any Soviet Union that we need to chase around the ocean anymore. They go, oh, really? Well, Representative Bob, we were going to put the engine parts being manufactured in your home district. And then suddenly Representative Bob is like, oh my God, we've got to have a submarine. And as silly as that sounds, you and I, actually bought a $1 billion per submarine called the Seawolf, pretty much exactly the same way. Even when the Defense Department said, no, we don't really need to buy new submarines or whatever, suddenly we were buying one, and it looks as if it happened that way in that circuit of influence. Now we move on to economic systems. So this is going to be tough to remember. Primary, secondary, tertiary sector production. So primary sector production, I dig it out of the ground. This is agriculture and mining. Secondary sector production. This is where I take what I mine and I make it into a thing. I manufacture it. And then tertiary center production, which is services. Now, most of us that are getting a college degree are probably going to be in the service sector. That's teaching, that's architecture, lawyers, nurses, doctors, professors. We're engaged in tertiary sector production. So now we're going to talk about our isms. Start first with the capitalism, where, of course, we've all learned that this is the sacrosanct kind of production in which private ownership of the means of production means like factories and things like that. And everyone's going for personal profits, and the government plays very little into this. And this was cooked up by a guy named Adam Smith. Now, your book kind of glosses over him, but Smith is an interesting character in that he actually believed that God was involved in the economy. And he talked about the invisible hand of the economy in which God either took people out or in to success and productivity based on this. He wasn't an economist. He was actually a pastor. But we really like that idea of capitalism, particularly rich people like this pursuit of personal profits. But one of the things that Smith couldn't have foreseen, or really nobody that was around at the founding of our economy here in the United States, was the growth of not just corporations, but what's called transnational corporations. These are corporations that are spread out all across the globe to where, they look over there. Walmart is the largest and most profitable private corporation, and it's huge. $485 billion. This was 2015 numbers. But if you close down all the Walmarts in America, you wouldn't stop Walmart. Walmart would still be in other places. So again, transnational. The sort of the the driving force was going to be that competition would always be the great equalizer in capitalism. Unfortunately, what we find is actually oligopolies and shared monopolies where few companies get together and they seem to almost have, if you will, a gentleman's agreement not to actually be too competitive. And they don't want to drive each other's costs and stuff down, and they actually seem to work this way. And there's actually been several lawsuits in which the government has found that exact kind of thing going on. There's also something called interlocking corporate directorates. This is where people on one board sit on several other boards. So their view of the economy, their view of capitalism becomes the view of capitalism because they sit on, so many boards. So they have the General Motors board up there in your chart here on page 404, and we got the CEO of ConocoPhillips, Vice President of Lockheed Martin, CEO of Coca-Cola. So these people are sitting on the board of General Motors. So not only are they running and influencing their own companies, but they're influencing General Motors. Now, the one part that I was struck by was how few people on that board of directors that you see listed actually know how to make a car. While I'm not a big fan of Henry Ford, I can actually say, while he ran the company, he actually knew how to make a car. The whole point of Smithian economics and capitalism from a book called The Wealth of Nations was laissez-faire, very little government interest, and let the markets decide, including if the markets bottomed out. He would have not been a fan of any government bailouts. Then we get to another ism, that's socialism. Karl Marx come up with this, and under pure socialism, the state, rather than people, would own the means of production, own the factories, and that the workers would work for the state, public ownership in pursuit of collective goods, with central decision making being, the state will decide how many tons of steel the defense industry gets, the car industry gets, the razor blade industry gets, etc. The idea being that pursuing these collective goals and the ownership by the state, there won't be this need to exploit the worker. Marx saw this in his writings spreading all throughout the developed world in Europe. Actually, it turns out it seems to actually take hold mostly in agrarian nations or severe climate nations or island nations, where the idea of collective goals seem to really make more sense. If I'm on an island, for instance, healthcare becomes less and less of something that, you should personally take care of that. I've got to be concerned about your healthcare because if you get some disease, then you're going to give it to me if we're on an island. So I may not like you, but I'm going to have to take care of you. I may not care so much about your poverty as much as if you're really poor, you may come and steal from me. So it becomes incumbent upon me to think of collective goals. Now, here's the good news. There are no pure systems anymore. There are mixed economies. We have democratic socialism, and then there's also welfare state, which the United States has the welfare state, which you have the economy running, but there's a safety net, theoretically, below in which we won't allow people to fall. And right now, as we're battling the COVID, that safety net in a Republican-controlled presidency and a Republican-controlled Senate, they leapt right in and wanted to give money to people knowing that this growth, this tremendous growth in unemployment, was going to be destabilizing to society in general. So clearly, economies do not work in isolation like a laboratory experiment. Then there's discussion of professions. That's going to be your goal as getting a college degree, to be a professional. And there you see the 5 characteristics of profession membership. But the one that they leave out is also that you're supposed to know your job on day one. No one's going to train you to be a dentist on day one. You're supposed to know how to be a dentist on day one. No one trains me how to be a professor. I'm supposed to know how to be a professor on day one when they give me the job. But there's also another thing called deprofessionalization. This is where some jobs are being deprofessionalized, where you see certain kinds of work being considered less and less professional. So they are being, if you will, downgraded. My own occupation seems to be falling under this, where everybody's an adjunct professor and there aren't any tenured professors, with the protection that allows to have, groundbreaking and society challenging ideas. And we'll pause there